Stocks, bonds, ETFs, straight out of downtown Chicago. This is Zach's Market Edge.
Welcome to Zach's Market Edge, the podcast about investing in your life. I'm your host, Tracy Reinick, and this week I'm joined by David Bartosiak, the editor of Zach's Blockchain Innovators newsletter, to talk about what else? Blockchain, and of course, Bitcoin, which is mixed in. So I had to go back and look at the last time Dave and I actually talked about the blockchain or Bitcoin on this podcast, because we have done podcasts on it, but it's been a long time. It was actually July 3rd, 2018. So over almost 3 years ago now. And back then, I recall, Dave, that we had a hard time finding stocks because we were talking about Bitcoin. And I wanted to add the blockchain in there. And so we ended up looking at some, like, what I consider to be kind of crazy stocks now that I'm looking at the list. So one of them I do remember was CBOE, because I think they were handling some kind of trades or something they were doing, like in the back end.
They launched the futures contracts for
Yes,
Bitcoin.
that was it. So we talked about them, and then Kodak was in there, KODK, because they were launching that coin. Do they still even have this? I don't know, that they were going to use to pay photographers who were getting payment on the copyrighted photos that they have out there. And they were going to use the blockchain technology and all of that to track that, and so that they would get payments. But I don't know what's happened with that. Then we had some kind of old standbys that are still, I think, on the scene. Square and MasterCard were in there too. But now it seems, like I said, kind of crazy that those were the only ones we really had to talk about. We had to kind of stretch to find some stocks back in the day. But now it's like it's everywhere, it seems.
Yeah, it's what I was hoping for early on in the Blockchain Innovators portfolio, because I had so little to choose from. I had to be creative.
Yeah.
Because, and it's kind of funny, because the way initially we did it, I would create a radar of stocks by searching the SEC's filings for the word blockchain. And then I'd come up with these tickers, and then I would wait for them to come in the good graces of the Zach's rank. And that's essentially how we would come up with these names. So I would find these names, which is how I found some very obscure names that were out there and available. But then as the adoption of the blockchain and crypto also became more mainstream, and then now in vogue, it's been a lot easier to find names that are within the space or have some kind of tie, some subsidiary, some sort of relationship with the blockchain or with Bitcoin. So it's gotten a lot easier now to find these names to target, and we don't have to hope that Kodak's coin is going to work, which they've subsequently abandoned, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, they abandoned it. There was an article on Bloomberg about how they abandoned crypto and went into drugs. Which was
right,
around
they did.
COVID time, the initial stages of trying to come up with a drug. So it continues to evolve. It's exciting, and I think early on, even back around that time, it was gimmicky, in that you remember the whole Long Island iced tea, and then they changed their name to
Yes.
Island Blockchain.
Yes.
It was like these companies were pulling these tactics to try and associate themselves with this new technology that was up and coming, but they really didn't have the business to go ahead and back it up. Whereas now there are companies founded just on that blockchain business and are just seeking to make the profits to give them that legitimization in the marketplace.
Yeah. So as an investor, what should I be looking around to get in if I want to get into some blockchain trades? Do I want the ones that, do I want to buy companies that are using Bitcoin now? The ones like Tesla or MicroStrategy that's buying it and holding Bitcoin? Do I want to get into some kind of tech area that's actually the behind the scenes, the infrastructure of Bitcoin, or do I want to buy companies that are utilizing the blockchain type of technology that, was the excitement of blockchain?
I think the way to profit over the long term with this space is going to be to find a company that is utilizing the blockchain to disrupt a current industry. Okay. So, for example, real estate, kind of a cloud-based real estate blockchain services, right? Think about things right now that are maybe heavily paperwork based that require a lot of checks and balances. So the other one is like the global shipping industry, trying to track a shipment from port to port, and it's got to clear customs in all these ports and go to different places and be tracked down. So where there's these huge inefficiencies along those supply chains, those are areas where the blockchain can definitely come in and help out. So you want to find those sort of disruptors within these industries that are utilizing the blockchain that I think is what's really going to pay off, because that's sort of what the trend I've seen is. Initially, your mainstream companies kind of didn't want to sound too cheesy, so they didn't want to jump on that early blockchain bandwagon. And then you had some early adopters that would say, okay, yeah, well, we have a wholly owned subsidiary that does a little something like that. And then it just kind of expanded to where you have some companies that are just like, no, this is now like a major focus of what we're going to do is building out this blockchain to help our business run more efficiently. So I would say you got to stay away from the gimmicky stuff. Okay. Have a great deal of patience, because as with any disruptor, there are going to be some really bad times. There's going to be some good times, but there's going to be some bad times. And if you're rolling the dice on a company that's going to come in and disrupt an entire industry, sometimes they're going to fall flat, and it's not going to work. So my advice is to kind of scatter your risk around quite a few names. Don't load the boat on any one name. Don't fall in love with the story, because just because they have a great story, it doesn't mean that they're going to execute on that idea. And keep an open mind to these new names that are coming out, and they don't have to be so tied to the blockchain. So you don't have to come out and buy a Bitcoin miner. You don't necessarily need to do that. You don't necessarily need to come out and buy a stock that buys Bitcoin and holds it on their balance sheet, like MicroStrategy, as you mentioned before. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to play this sort of new efficiency that's coming through this technology, and I think that's where you're going to be able to make money over the long run.
Okay, but it sounds like it may still be difficult for the, say, average investor like myself, who doesn't follow the blockchain that closely, to actually find these companies that are utilizing it, because they're not called, real estate blockchain company. So yeah. How do I know that particular real estate company is utilizing that technology? Are they announcing it? Are they promoting that they're using the blockchain? Or is that solely up to me to do the research to find out who is doing it, who is using it?
Yeah, so most of the companies will have press releases talking about it. What I do, there's that Edgar search, or the SEC full text search that I use, but that is kind of, a little bit mundane, to say the least. Yeah. Kind of a boring thing to do, but I do it anyway because that's part of my job. Most of them will have press releases. So if you just, so for example, like some of the names we have here in blockchain innovators, one of them is ICLK Interactive. Okay. So they're one of those real estate blockchain companies that's working on taking some of that paperwork that we push back and forth and getting it up on the blockchain in sort of its infant stages. They're trying to come up with something that will be more efficient. So if I do ICLK Interactive blockchain and I do a Google search for that, make sure it includes, the blockchain, and you basically just read the articles that come out on it. And if it describes a business that they're in, or a subsidiary that's doing business with the blockchain, then there you go. And if not, then you go on to the next one. So it's a little bit of a tedious process. But that's I cut out some of that work obviously in my portfolio, because if it's on my list, it means that either the company has already gained exposure to it, or they are investigating it, or a lot of these places will have board members that are heavily involved in blockchain elsewhere. And then that they're there specifically to advise on that type of technology. So obviously the company's looking at ways to, become more efficient.
Yeah. Are there any companies out there that specialize in like consulting on the blockchain that, so if I'm a shipping company and I'm like, you know what, I want to move towards blockchain technology because I can save money and it's much more efficient and productivity will soar, blah, 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 but I have no idea what I'm doing. Are there companies where they can get help? I'm assuming.
Yes, there's a ton of them. That has been sort of a buzzword for these consultants for a while.
Okay.
So Accenture has a huge page where they talk about how they do their blockchain services to help companies sort of harness that power of the blockchain.
Yeah.
IBM is a big one that's been in it, but IBM actually puts their money where their mouth is, so to speak. In that IBM has already partnered with Maersk, the huge shipping magnate.
Oh.
And they have TradeLens, which is a blockchain-based system to track shipments, like we were talking about, globally. So they've got a lot of different ports around the world that have signed on with them, and a lot of different shipping companies. And so far, so good. So IBM is one that you can definitely plug into. Okay. And most of them, actually, you would sort of be hard pressed to find a consulting agency right now, if they're in tech whatsoever, that will not mention blockchain. Yeah. In their pitch. Now, how much of that is that they really know what they're doing versus how much of it is them marketing? I don't know, because I'm not that intimately involved with that business. But a ton of them, most of them, will say that they help with that.
Okay, but the problem of buying one of those, like an Accenture, is you are getting obviously the rest of the business too. So
correct.
It's hard to just get like a blockchain, it sounds like.
Yeah, and early on, it was really hard for me to find companies that were just sort of exclusively blockchain. Nor did I want those companies really, because the technology was in its infancy and these companies didn't find any way to really make money on it. Yeah. But which is also the advantage of these blockchain stocks, because a lot of them have solid underlying businesses. And then this blockchain exploration is sort of just a side project of theirs. So they don't have to rely solely on any revenue that might come from that. It's like an incubator for them, so they can make a ton of money in the future, hopefully.
Okay. Where do things stand on like the software side? Is that an area that will have a lot of blockchain companies or no?
I am not seeing a lot of that right now.
Okay.
Within my, searches and such that I do. Yeah. On the software side, I would say like security software, and just sort of security and tracking is really the sort of software you're seeing, or fintech. That's where I've seen most of the exposure. I haven't seen much else outside of that, and on the sort of the software side. You could argue that these smart contracts are kind of the software, or the smart permitting. So this is basically just taking anything, and again, think of just what's a pain in your daily life, like billing for your municipality's water.
Right.
Think about that whole process. We just got an email here in South Florida from my local municipality apologizing that their rollout of their new software has been so terrible because we couldn't get, it like your account number wouldn't work, and then it wouldn't let you pay, and then the payments weren't processing properly, and it wouldn't show your payments going through, and they basically just apologized. And it's this whole thing of like, this shouldn't be that hard. We don't need this whole entire arduous process for this. Let's just, we can have a blockchain-based system for this that confirms that this has been paid by this homeowner and it's over, right? And everybody could see who paid and who didn't pay, and there's no way to hack the system, and everything is fine. So there's companies working on stuff like that. So just anything that is kind of clunky, there are different. If there's too many checks and balances within the system, if there's a lot of red tape, if it's, and I hate to pick on governments, but we all know that they don't work in the most efficient manners.
Right.
And there's where blockchain-based solutions can really come in and help.
Okay.
Just imagine if we voted on the blockchain, would have any of these problems that we have now, any of these ongoing, legal battles in the Supreme Court about who won what, because we would know. So that's the sort of space where that can help.
Okay. Now, what about the cryptos? What's going on with them and blockchain and just that whole universe? Obviously, Bitcoin, we know, is being adopted by some of these companies now. MicroStrategy was kind of the first one to at least to own it on their balance sheets. And then Tesla made their announcement, and they're claiming that they're going to allow you to use Bitcoin to purchase cars at some point. And then Square also owns it on their balance sheet. Where does that all fit in? Should I be paying attention to these? You said earlier you don't really care about the ones that own it on their balance sheet.
Yeah, I mean, just from an investment perspective, I'm not looking at them as I'm not buying. I don't have MicroStrategy in Blockchain Innovators, right? Oh. And they've been one of those companies that goes out. They do fundraising. They issue equity, and they take the money and they buy Bitcoin.
Right.
And that's kind of their game plan now, which is fine, but they're sort of evolving into a Bitcoin trust now versus any sort of company.
Yeah.
Which, there's ways. I think there will be ways to gain more pure exposure to Bitcoin if that's what you want. But why not just go and buy Bitcoin? I don't understand why I need to do what do I need MicroStrategy for to do it? Just go buy Bitcoin.
Right.
So, but the cryptos, I think as they become, an asset, so they've evolved now into a legitimate asset that companies are holding on their balance sheets. So that's changing the way that people look at these cryptos. So, we've heard the arguments about an anti-fiat currency trade and all that. It hasn't, the crypto space has not traded like that. It's traded like a more speculative risk-on asset versus an anti-fiat money trade, right? So that hasn't really developed yet. That could happen over time, but we're talking, this is going to take decades to develop and mature as an asset class. I was looking, 2-3 years ago, Jamie Dimon called blockchain or Bitcoin a fraud, basically.
Yeah.
And now he's saying you should have 1% of it in your portfolio.
Yeah, he's changed his tune for sure.
Changed his tune. Central banks have changed their tune. I mean, everybody, you got to kind of see through. You got to see through the smoke and understand what's happening. And there are aspects of this that are going to be applicable, for even central bank holdings using their technology. Having a digital dollar is something now the Fed has been talking about actively. A stable coin that's pegged to the U.S. dollar, which is, something that could not have been here without the blockchain technology. Now, Bitcoin still is sort of the main thing that everybody wants to talk about when we're talking about crypto. Obviously, it's made this huge run, getting up over 56,000 a couple weeks ago. I see today we're trading at 47,000. Who would have thought we'd be up this far after that nasty crash we had a couple years ago? But Bitcoin tends to always just kind of bounce back. And that's a function of the demand for it, but also the restricted supply. And I think the one thing that I want the really staunch Bitcoin opposer to think about, the main argument, or one of the main arguments I've heard, anti-Bitcoin arguments have been, well, it's not backed by anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just digital computer nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, everyone on this network has made hard dollar investments in the technology that they're using, the hardware that they're using to do the mining, and has spent money on the electricity in order to power those cards and all that. So you have an expansive network of people that has skin in the game, which is what will help it to have that value, is because so many people have already literally put money into this idea. So I think that they're missing that fact that, no, this is backed by the money and the effort and the time of all these people on that network that have put in to this budding phenomenon.
Yeah.
So it's not backed by nothing. It's backed by that entire network. So it's there is something real there, and I think that's what we're seeing with the price. Now, if you're talking Bitcoin, you got to talk about the Ethereum network too.
Right.
So these are where like these smart contracts will trade. This is the Ethereum has a little bit more functionality, I suppose, because of the ability to have those smart contracts on that blockchain. So imagine a world where, I issue a bond for $10 million, and that bond automatically pays out every 3 months via the blockchain. So you don't have to worry about whether or not this bond issuer is going to be able to make that payment. Like, it's coming out regardless. And it can trade instantly, and everybody sees where that bond is and how many people have been buying it and what the rate is. And so it adds transparency, and everybody wins in that case. So these smart contracts are something that you see a lot on that network, which is why that has been going kind of crazy. So they used to say that if Bitcoin is digital gold, then Ethereum is sort of like the digital NASDAQ, or like digital stock market, because it's like within that crypto, you can have these little inner workings, like these little mini programs that are going within it. So I don't want to get into like the altcoins, because that, is just beyond the scope of, I think, what you need to really understand if you're trying to make U.S., domestic stock market investments in the space. I wouldn't worry too much about all the altcoins that are out there. That's kind of a whole new brave world that you can go ahead and lose yourself in, and that's just like stock picking, trying to find the new altcoin that's coming out that's going to do well. It's a whole different universe. Not something that we focus on too much here. Not something I focus on. I really just try to find the companies that are disruptive, that have some ties to the blockchain, and could be onto something. Okay.
Now, the blockchain stocks have been red hot here to start 2021. So should I wait for a pullback if I'm an investor in some of these? Or is it still the first couple of innings, so I'm fine like diving in? What kind of advice do you have for the new investors?
Yeah, so I think I've already seen a little bit of a pullback in some of these names. Just as, the last couple of weeks, we've kind of had, even though the markets, the broad market or the Dows and the Dow have been kind of pushing higher, if you look further out on the risk spectrum, some of the riskier, higher beta names have been suffering a little bit. I think it's a little bit of a rotation out of those real high flyers, getting back into some of the more bread and butter names that's happening. That's part of it. It sure felt a little shaky. When you see the high beta stuff really start to get crushed, it always feels like the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
But we know that we've had that feeling, countless times over the last decade, and the market has just kind of always found a way to march higher. But so the blockchain names kind of got caught up in taking a few steps back. I mean, I'm just looking at the additions that I've made to the portfolio over the course of the last month or so, and nothing's really rocking and rolling because I guess one of my the Danios, the shipping company, has done well, but the rest of them have kind of taken a step back, or some of the real higher beta stuff is kind of got deflated just over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks. So the pullbacks are there, and you just have to decide how much direct blockchain exposure do you want. So, let's think of each one of these companies as having a portion of their revenue that's derived from the blockchain, and the other portion is derived from their more traditional business. What sort of mix do you want to have? If you're looking for something that's like 100% blockchain business, you're going to have 100% of the risk. Okay. Versus something that, maybe 5% of what they do is blockchain, then obviously that risk is going to be much lower, but potentially that reward could be lower as well over the long term. So it's I try to throw in some of the real high beta, high growth names in there with a lot of potential.
Okay.
Tell people this is, I'm not pulling any punches. You're not buying GE. Okay, this is a stock that could whip around dramatically over the course of the next few weeks, but that's why we have 20 names in blockchain innovators, because there's going to be ones that go down 30%. It's just going to happen. You never know which one that's going to be, and you never know when it's going to hit. You never know when the market's going to turn. So that sort of unknown in there is the risk that you really have to worry about. So this isn't something that you take your kid's college fund and load the boat on. Okay. This is something that really requires, I think, I just consider myself a starting point for the research that needs to be done. This is an idea. These are stocks that are within the space, and then you get to decide whether or not that's something that you think is going to, do well over the course of the next several years, or if it's something that, you should avoid altogether. It really is just a starting point for further research.
Okay, that's great advice. Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like I've learned a lot about blockchain just on this podcast, and we're going to have to do more updates. We can't wait another 3 years, obviously.
No, and the way that technology has been moving and the space has been evolving, this might be totally different in 6 months.
Right, exactly. All right. Let me recap the stocks that we talked about. Some were just kind of mentioned, but I'll mention the tickers anyways. So on 2018 show, we did talk about CBOE and KODK, KODK, but that was the old blockchain. And then we talked about iClick Interactive, ICLK, Accenture, ACN, IBM, which is IBM. MicroStrategy is MSTR, Tesla, of course, TSLA. We mentioned Square, SQ, and the shipping company he mentioned, that's Container Ships, is what they own. Danios is DAC, and I think that was about it. But some good names in there and some interesting concepts and things to keep in mind when you're looking around at blockchain. And as always, be sure to get our podcast somewhere so that you don't miss the future episodes. So when Dave is back on with some more updates on blockchain, you're able to get it right away. So we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on Spotify, and we're now on Amazon Podcasts, which is under Amazon Music, I believe. You can find all the podcasts over there as well, but be sure to get us somewhere, and I'll see you again next week with some more stocks.
This material is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein constitutes investment, legal, accounting, or tax advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold a security. Do not act or rely upon the information and advice given in this podcast without seeking the services of competent and professional legal, tax, or accounting counsel. Publication and distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and the information contained herein does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No recommendation or advice is being given as to whether any investment or strategy is suitable for a particular investor. It should not be assumed that any investments in securities, companies, sectors, or markets identified and described were or will be profitable. All information is current as of the date herein and is subject to change without notice. Any views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Zacks Investment Research as a whole.